Lamed Tes. Okay, Kumlena Blat Gemara, Motzei Shabbos Parshas Noach. Today's blot is Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. We're up to the 2 dots, 3 lines on the top of the page, and we're just discussing the distance that a person may walk on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, Tchum Shabbos. And if you want to extend, now we're talking about Yom Tov because we're carrying. If you want to extend beyond the Tchum, and the question is different objects, different items, whose Tchum do you work with? You work with the original owners or the borrower and so on. So the last case we had was where a woman was making bread, challah, and she borrowed spices for cooked food, or she borrowed water and salt for the dough. And the question is, whose tchum do you follow? And the Mishnah says that because the water and the dough belong to, the water and the salt belong to one person, and the dough and the flour belongs to another person, so they only with their tchumim overlap may you walk on Yom Tov. So if one person extended the tchum to the east and the other person extended the tchum to the west, we cut off, and just wherever they both are permitted to walk, where they overlap. Rabbi Yehuda says, when it comes to water is so insignificant, we ignore the owner of the water and we just look at the owner of the dough. Says the Gemara, 3 lines on top. Rabbi Yehuda points in mind. When it comes to water, Rabbi Yehuda says we ignore the owner of the water, we just focus on the dough. Says the Gemara, it seems when it comes to water, he says you ignore the owner of the water, but melach loy. When it comes to salt, we don't ignore the owner of the salt. That's what our Mishnah says. And our question is 4 lines on the top of the Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. Tanya, didn't we learn? Rabbi Yehuda said that not only when it comes to the dough, and we wonder how do we calculate the tchum, we ignore the water, but melech, mayim umelech b'telin, ignore the salt as well, because the salt is so insignificant.
Can I ask you a question? What before we're discussing borrowing kalim or something, that's different. You got to return it. Here, you're not returning the water or the tavlin. You're returning something similar. You're not returning the same thing.
True, but there's ownership here. When this person lent you on Yom Tov, it didn't lend
you. They actually haven't lent you. They've given it to you because they're not going to get it back.
It doesn't matter, but you owe them. So they're still considered the owner. That's what we're saying here. They're still considered the owner. And
that's my question. Why?
We just had it yesterday. Abaye said the reason why is because we're worried about Isa Shutfin. And the reason why we say that it's not bottle is because it looks like a partnership, and people will then think that any partnership, it goes according to whoever wants to, not the shared overlap tchumim. That's why. And according to Rava, the reason is because spices never become bottled. They are very significant, and even though tomorrow you're going to reimburse them something else, but who owns these spices right now? The original owner. And Avashi said, "Kadovish yesh lo because you can eat it the way you can wait till tomorrow, and there's no problem of tchum, or you can eat the whole thing right now without walking at all." So getting back here, Rabbi Yehuda says the water is insignificant, but the salt is, and therefore we say that if the salt is there, then we look with the overlap. Yet in the Brisa clearly says that not only the water is insignificant, the salt is also significant. And he says, "Baby Isa, baby data." Whether we're talking about dough, whether we're talking about a cooked food, in both cases, the fact that somebody lent you water, salt, it doesn't matter. There's 2 kinds of salt. Haben melach daimis, haben melach istreitnis. Here we are talking about melach daimis. If you remember from the Gemara Chulin, or we've been learning Gemara Chulin about that you have to wash mayim achronim before benching because you might have some salt left over and between your fingernails, and it's very dangerous.
Ben, can you mute yourself, please, Ben?
Okay, and can someone tell Ben where we're up to? So you won't have to ask. Anybody? Does anybody know where we're up to?
Lamed Tes Amud Daf.
No, in the art scroll.
39A1 on the right-hand column.
Just before the Mishnah.
Okay, so we're saying there's 2 kinds of salt. There's melach daimis and habe melach istreiknis. Melach daimis is very, very fine salt, and it gets stuck between your fingernails, and it's very dangerous if it touches your eyes. So you have to wash your hands. So that kind of salt is what the Brisa is talking about, and disappears. But when our Mishnah, when we say that only water we ignore, but not salt, is talking about melach istreiknis, like kosher, like sea salt, kosher sea salt, which is kosher salt, which is much larger, and therefore it's noticeable. Says the Gemara, but Tanya, we learned in another brayso. Rabbi says, Mayim umelach betelin beisa. He says there, when it comes to dough, the water, the salt, become nullified. They get absorbed. It's not seen anymore, and therefore it doesn't matter. And we're talking about over here fine salt. But the ain big data. But it says over there, when it comes to cooked food, the water is not ignored at all. The pnei roitva, because you can see it in the gravy. So therefore, it seems over there that in our Mishnah, it makes no distinction between whether it's dough, whether it's a cooked item. In all instances, the water we ignore. And therefore, you just follow the owner of the dough regarding the tchum. And yet in this brayso, it clearly says that when it comes to cooked food, we don't ignore the water because we can see it. It's visible. There's the gravy. And therefore, you only could take it at tchum when they both overlap. So it's not a problem. It depends what we're talking about. If we are talking about over there that the food item is very, very thick, so everything got absorbed, there's very little liquid there, then the water is not noticeable, not visible, and therefore we ignore the owner of the water, we just look at the food. But our Mishnah is talking about, that's our Mishnah. This brayso is talking about where the water is noticeable, where the food is not, it's a lot of liquid there, and therefore because the water is visible, you cannot ignore it, and you can only take it to the tchum where they both overlap, the food itself and the owner of the water. So the Mishnah continues.
Is this a practical halacha for us? Like, is there, if there's, with regards to someone makes something with spices from the neighbor or whatever, there's any practical implication now?
Only if you're going to take, this is all to do, it's limited only to tchum. The tchum, which means you're going to walk outside of your city environs and you want to extend it further than that. So, I mean, how often do you ever, extend your tchum, if ever?
Not really, but just practically speaking.
That's the practical difference, only in that respect. So, for example, it only depends if you want to extend your tchum and the other person did not extend the tchum. When you extend your tchum in one direction, you forfeit the equal amount in the other direction. So if you decide to extend your tchum a certain amount, let's say the 1,000 amma mark, you decided to extend your tchum. Excuse me, which means you forfeit 1,000 amas to, let's say you went east, you forfeit 1,000 amas to the west. But the other person didn't want to extend the tchum, which means you only overlap over 2,000 amas to the west. Right? That person can walk 2,000 amas, even though you can walk 3, but you only overlap 2. That's all you can take this food to. That's the only nafkamin halacha, if that's negeya halacha ma'isa to you. Mishnah, talking about chum hagachelis. If you have coal, and you want to carry coal, is kiragli abayla. You only carry the distance of the owner of the coal, which is obvious. But v'shal heves, if you want to carry a flame, b'chol makom. If you want to carry a flame, what do you mean? If I go to your candle, or in the olden days, if you had a cigarette and you would light up a cigarette from somebody's match, you don't have to follow the tchum of the person. All you took from them is the flame. So you can take it and go wherever your tchum takes you to. Another difference between a coal and a flame, gachela shel hegdish, a coal that belongs to hegdish, you're not allowed to have any personal benefit from hegdish. Mo'ilim, but if you use it for your own personal use, you're stealing from hegdish and you have to bring a carbon me'ila and so on. But shalheves, if you took a flame from basically hegdish, loy nenin, the rabbis said that we don't want you to have any benefit, but if you did, you did not transgress from the Torah. So the rabbis said you shouldn't benefit, but that's it.
Flame mean like a candle or something like that? What's a flame?
Just gave you an example. A flame is like a cigarette. You go over to somebody's candle and you take the fire from the candle and you put it onto your cigarette. Or you take a candle and you go to someone else's candle and you take the fire because you lit your candle. When you lit your own candle, what did you take from the other candle? Only the fire. That's called a shalheves, a flame. So the flame has no mamosha. There's nothing tangible there. There's nothing really that substantial there, and therefore we say that by the flame, you don't have to follow the tchum of the original owner because you didn't take anything from that person. When it comes to the Beitza Daf, if you take a flame from the Torah's perspective, you're not stealing. And the third case is if on Shabbos you carry out a piece of coal on Shabbos, then obviously you're chayiv for carrying. But shalheves, if all you did was you took a flame, potter. So how exactly on Shabbos you took only a flame, we'll soon see, without carrying. Talk about we learned. In fact, there are 5 examples of differences between a coal and a flame. Some of them, 3 of them are in the Mishnah and 2 others. First of all, regarding tchum, the coal, you follow the original owner, that person's tchum, but shalheves b'chol mak. When it comes to the flame, you can carry it any direction you want to go. As long as in your own tchum, you don't have to worry about the original where the flame came from. Number 2, if you use it for your own personal benefit, you're stealing from the base of Mikdash, but when it comes to the flame, you shouldn't. The Rabbanan said don't have any benefit, but if you did, you didn't transgress from the Torah. Number 3, if you took a coal from Avodah Zarah, the pasuk says you now have anything to do in your possession that has anything to do with idols. If you took coal from Avodah Zarah, asura, it is forbidden, but shalheves mutaris. But a flame is permitted, even though it's from Avodah Zarah, because there's nothing substantial in it. There's nothing here. There's no mamoshes in it. Nothing of substance. Number 4, which we have in our Mishnah. You take out a coal in a public place, chayiv, you carry it on Shabbos. But shalheves, if you took a flame, butter, because you didn't take anything of substance. Number 5.
Why do you say the flame is not a substance? The flame is important. Flame is a fire. With it, you transfer the flame.
Has nothing to do with importance or not importance. It's nothing to do with anything tangible. Fire is not tangible, and therefore,
why is tumah tangible?
Sorry.
Why is tumah tangible?
In what way is tumah? What do you mean tumah tangible?
There's no real substance in tumah. It's a state. It's a state.
You're 100% right.
Flame is a state. Tumah is a state.
Paul, you're 100% right. And therefore what? What's your question?
I don't know if there was any question.
You're making a statement.
I'm wondering. Well, I'm just wondering why a flame is.
I'll explain to you.
A flame
Tumah,
is no substance.
Okay, tumah is a spiritual concept. There's nothing physical about tumah. And tumah, if you're carrying out a Talmudic piece of meat, it's irrelevant. The tumah has no bearing on the fact that you're carrying it on Shabbos, not carrying it on Shabbos. Tumah has a different set of rules altogether, and we've learned that it has to be a certain dimension, the size of an egg, and all that kind of stuff. We're now talking about on Shabbos. If you remember when we learned in Shabbos, Hamatzniya, Perik Hamatzniya, there it talks about every single thing that you carry in Shabbos has to be of substance. So if you carry food out, it has to be a kazayis. If you carry this out, it has to be that something you can feed a goat. Remember, everything has to be a certain quantity. If it's less than that quantity, even though you carry it on Shabbos, from the Torah perspective, it's not called carrying because it has no share. Okay, so that's what we mean by fire.
But you know, a flame taken from a Hindu temple, to me, there's something wrong with it. It's not just there's nothing there. There's nothing wrong with going in there and taking a light out of their candle. But it's
Paul, you're introducing the concept of Tumah and Tara again, or Avodah Zarah, Kedusha. What Reb Motl, I believe, is saying to fire it's a physical existence. It's a combination of gases and so on. But you can light as many candles as you want from one candle. You're not going to detract from the original candle, because it's not a tangible substance. It's not something which can be measured so easily. I'm sure they have systems for measuring bushfires and so on like that. But you can carry a flame. It's not a tangible substance. You can pass that flame on to millions and millions of other little candles, and it won't detract from yours.
Why on Shabbos? Not on Shabbos.
I understand all that.
It's nothing to do with the Tumah and the Tara aspect. That's
if we want to use a metaphor for something spiritual, we use a metaphor of fire, because fire is not really physical, even though you can see it and you put your finger there, you'll burn your finger, but you can't. It's not a physical object that has dimensions. It is not a physical, tangible thing. In fact, there's a whole discussion in philosophy what the definition of life is, and interesting because most things that you think of straight away comes to your mind. What the definition of life is: a living thing has to breathe, a living thing has to eat. All of these things, they say fire then is a living thing, because fire does all that. And in fact, the only definition that we come up for life that differentiates a person from fire is procreate. That we procreate and fire doesn't. Otherwise, everything else about it is fire is the same thing. But fire itself is nothing in itself. It just does all these other things. But anyway, getting back to Shabbos. Shabbos, we only chayiv if you're carrying a physical thing. It's not physical. Nothing there. Okay. Difference number 5.
So what do you do with the fire?
when
What
it
do you
co-
do with the fire on Shabbos? You're not
Talking about
supposed to handle it. What are you doing with it?
What are we doing with it? You took if you carry the call on a Shabbos, what are you doing with it? It's forbidden. And you're awesome hater, and you're going to get skila if somebody saw you. But if somebody saw you taking a fire, we'll soon see how you took a fire without anything else carrying in your hand. But if you took fire out on Shabbos, you won't be punished because you didn't carry anything. So how do you take fire without carrying anything? We'll soon discuss. And we'll come back to Avodah Zarah as well, Paul. So it says the Gemara. Difference number 5. Number 5 is where's this last line? If somebody says, I don't have any benefit from you, I hate you with a passion, I don't have anything to do with you, I don't have any benefit from you. Also, I cannot go and take coal from you because I'm benefiting from you. But I can take a flame, I can go light my candle from your candle because I didn't take anything from you. Fire is not considered a thing. Now the Gemara asks the first question. So very interesting. When it came to Hegdish, we says that even though fire is nothing, but the rabbis don't want you to take fire from Hegdish. And yet when it came to Avodah Zarah, there's no prohibition from the rabbis taking the fire, like you just gave an example, Paul. So how come? So why is it when it comes to the fire of Avodah Zarah, the rabbis permitted it? And why is it when it comes to Hegdish, the rabbi says, no, we don't want you to take any fire from Hegdish. What's the difference? Says Avodah Zarah, which people generally find repugnant, and people therefore have nothing to do with Avodah Zarah. And as a result of that, there was no reason to decree we don't want you to take the flame because next time you're going to take a coal. People don't generally use products of Avodah Zarah. But Hegdish, the loy even though people generally keep separate from Hegdish, but because it's awesome, but not because you find it repugnant in any way. The loibedili in chimney, so therefore they're not so separated from it as to the extent of Avodah Zarah. If we allow them to take the flame of Hegdish, next time they might take the coal. Gozer be Rabbana, the Rabbana therefore interdicted again season. What do you call it? Even using the fire.
Interesting when you see in the Gemara that they're saying Gozer be Rabbanan, and you said the Rabbanan made a Gezerah. The Gemara often doesn't really say who made this Gezerah. When did it happen?
Whenever any Issa Rabbanan is called a Gzera, there's 2 kinds of Rabbanan. There's a Gzera Rabbanan, there's a Takanas Rabbanan. You remember that we learned not so long ago that we follow Rab Meir when it comes to his Gzeras, but not when it comes to his Takanas. Gzera means whenever the rabbi said don't do something because if you do this, you might end up doing something else which is wrong, that's called a Gzera. Whenever the Rabbanan came along and made a new law, we want you to light Chanukah. We want you to do this. That's not a Gzera. That's a Mitzvah de Rabbanan or Takana de Rabbanan. This here is a Gzera. We don't want you to take the flame because if you take the flame, next time you will take the coal. That comes under the category of Gzera. So that's the wording here. But every Gzera Rabbanan is the same thing.
But my question is, when you say the Gemara says Gezerah by Rabbanan, who? They just says Rabbanan. When did this happen?
That we don't know.
We never know. It's just sort of like
usually we say it's from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, unless we know otherwise. All the Rabbanan started from Moshe Rabbeinu, unless we know specifically otherwise. But you do know Avodah Zarah, hey, we have these, Gzeras that they put into place because they realized that we don't know exact era, but we realized, they're getting too close with the Goyim, so we had to put certain Gzeras to make a demarcation. But otherwise, we don't have that. We assume it started from the beginning of time. Next, carry out a coal in a public place, chayiv on Shabbos, but shalhevi carry out a fire potter. Says the Gemara. First of all, Tanya, we did learn in a Beitza Hamaiti shalhev is culture chayiv. Says clearly, if you carry out a flame, no matter how minute it is, you are chayiv. You are chayiv. So what are you telling me that if you carry a flame on Shabbos, you are potter? It says in the Beitza clearly you're liable. There is talking about There is talking about you took it out with kind of a splinter, you took out a little piece of wood that was burning with the fire on it, and therefore that's why you're chayiv, because it's a bit more substantial. Says the Gemara, the tape, and we're talking about that you're carrying only the flame, no piece of wood, and that's why you're potter, because the flame has no substance. Says the Gemara, if you're carrying a piece of wood that was burning, forget about the flame. You're liable because you carried the piece of wood. What do you have to tell me you're liable because he carried the flame? If you're telling me that the flame means you had a piece of wood that was burning, then that's why you're chayiv on Shabbos for carrying the wood. Says the Gemara, but the less it was a tiny little toothpick, was a tiny little piece of wood that was burning, or a match. And therefore, as far as the wood is concerned, you're not liable, but you're liable because the fire is with the wood. Now we learned. You have, there is a limit, a minimum. When are you liable for carrying wood on Shabbos? If you took out enough wood that you can go ahead and cook an egg readily. You have to have a bit more substantial than just a match. And therefore, as far as the wood is concerned, you're not chayiv. But if you have the wood with the fire together, you become chayiv. But our Mishnah that says for the fire you're exempt is talking about when there's no wood. How in the world did you carry the fire when there's no wood? We'll come back to it soon. That's one answer. Abai gives another example. For example, the shayfa mana mashcha. You took a pot and on the outside you smeared it with oil, and then you lit a fire on the outside of the vessel, and you carried the vessel across. So then you are liable. Again, the Gemara asks, so why are you telling me you're liable because you had a fire? You're liable because you carried a vessel across into the street. Says the Gemara, we're talking about the chaspa, clay shard. It wasn't really a vessel. And says the Gemara, so what? The tapering through chaspa, and you're allowed to carry a clay shard outside it. You're also liable for Shabbos. Forget the flame. Says Gemara, but the less shiura. Shard also needs to have a certain minimum amount. It was less than that amount. So as far as how much clay do you have to carry? Enough that you can fill if there are holes if you have slats by a window and there's some gaps and you want to fill it, so that it has to be a certain amount. So we're talking about a case it was less than that amount. So as far as the shard is concerned, you're not liable. But if it was burning, then you are liable because you had it together with the shard. But if you just had the fire on its own, then you're not liable on Shabbos. And we'll come back to that, how that's possible. That's a simple question. You're telling me that if you carry the fire with something, then you're always liable. So what our Mishnah says, Hamaitzi shall have as potter, if you carry a flame on Shabbos, only the flame. How do you carry a flame without something, a claim needs something combustible to hold on to? So when it says you're going to adye aduye l'shusarabim, we're talking about here, you have like a bellow, and you're standing, you have a fire in your courtyard burning near the fence, and you stand there with these bellows and you blow the fire outside of your courtyard and it jumps into the street. The fire itself jumps into the street. So you would think you'd be liable. The Mishnah says you're not, because fire is not of substance. That's what we're talking about. Mishnah. What about a boil? What about if you have, let's say, a well? Shel yachid. If the well belongs to an individual person, then when somebody draws water from there, what's the tchum? How far can they take the water? Then they can only take it keragla yachid. The owner of the well, wherever they can walk to on this Yom Tov, that's how far you can walk. What about a well that is, a communal well for everybody in the town? Then then basically everybody in the town is able to walk 2,000 amos in all directions. That's how you can walk as well. There's a big discussion in the Mefarshim of what happens if one of the people of that town decided to make themselves a tchum to extend on the west side, which means that this person cannot even walk 1 amma on the east side. Does that affect the rest of the town, or do we say that he's nullified? Whatever he did, it doesn't count. Then the last thing is v'shel oile bubble. We learned already before, and we learned other places that they made a special. People made the trek to Yerushalayim to make it easy for them. We had this narrative. They made these pits along the way, these wells along the way, for the public, so that they can go there with their animals, drink there, and so on and so forth. So the people who went there on Yom Tov and drew water, whose tchum were they able to walk? Is kiragle hamemali. According to our Mishnah, whoever took a bucket and filled it up with water, that person's tchum is the distance that they can walk. And why is that? Because no one owns that water. That water belongs to no one. It belongs to everyone. So we'll see. It belongs to no one. So when you lifted the water in the bucket, you acquired it by kinyan hagbah. Lifting is one of the forms of acquisition, and you just made it yours. And if you now turn around and lend the water to somebody else, that person is bound by your tchum because you made it yours. And what do you call it? And the reason why it becomes yours is because we say
Does that work in the same if he gives it to him, not lends it to him?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. If you lend it to him afterwards,
No, you give it to him. You say, "Don't give it back to me. I don't want it back. Here's
matter.
the water for you."
It doesn't matter. Why does it matter? Even though we learned before that Tchum is established in the beginning of Yom Tov, and this is right during Yom Tov in the daytime. So how do I establish the Tchum then? Because we apply the principle of Yesh Breira. Because the Chachamim said that everybody can use the water from the well, so whose water will it be? So we say, whoever draws water this Yom Tov from that well, then retroactively or retrospectively, it belonged to that person, as if it was that person's before Yom Tov. So that person who drew the water, it became his water, and he established the Tchum, and he gives it to anybody else as a gift or as a loan, makes no difference. They are all bound by this person's Tchum. That's the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, question, Tanakh, it says in our Mishnah, it says that if you have a well that belongs to an individual, you have to follow that individual. But Aminu, so let me ask you a question. It says, if you have rivers that are flowing and wells and springs that are flowing, because they don't have any particular place when Yom Tov began, it wasn't still, it was flowing the whole time. So therefore, it does. There's no particular, even if there's an owner, it doesn't mean anything because the water keeps on flowing. New water comes in and water goes out. So therefore, every single person who takes it, wherever they go, they can follow that. Yeah. Yeah. So our Mishnah said that when it comes to a well, we follow the owner. And there it seems to say when it comes to a well, there's water coming all the time. It doesn't really follow the owner at all. Our Mishnah is talking about a well with still water. We're not talking about a spring that's constantly flowing. You're right. If it's constantly flowing, then it's not the owner who determines the tchum. Our Mishnah is talking about when the well is still water or still in one place, and it's not really flowing, and therefore the owner is the one who establishes the tchum for that particular well on that Yom Tov. The water is gathered is still in one place. The Mishnah continued, those who went to the wells that were provided for the people who were traveling from Babel to Israel, is keragle hamemale. We go after the one who fills it, whoever filled it up, that's the one who belongs to. Itma, we learned an interesting argument. In the yeshivish world, the next piece of Gemara is very, especially the end of it, is discussed a lot. Tzos and all that. Itma, we learned. Milei v'nasan lechaveri. What happens, let's say Reuven and Shimon. So Reuven fills up a bucket of water from this well that was made for the public, for those traveling to Yerushalayim, and v'nasan lechaveri. And he did it on behalf of his friend. He did it on his friend. He didn't fill it for himself. When he drew the water from the well, he had in mind for Shimon. That was what he had in mind. Because we just said in the Mishnah, if he drew it for himself, then he establishes the tchum, and then if he gives somebody else, that person is bound by him. We're talking about he took it and he had in mind the other person. Reuven took water from the well, had in mind Shimon. Now Nachman says, in this instance, keragle mishin ismalulai. In this instance, he says, well, since you're Reuven, you did it on behalf of Shimon, then whatever tchum Shimon can walk, that's the law regarding this water as well. Rav Sheish says no. Keragle hamemale. Even though Reuven, when he drew the water, he had in mind Shimon, he's still bound by the tchum of Reuven. Now we need to understand the logic of that. Why should that be the case? Says the Gemara, what's going on here? What's the crux of the argument? Mar Savar, there's one opinion here that says an interesting discussion, which the Acharonim talk about, which comes really from here. When we have a public place, how do we understand a public use, or let's say a public street? Does it mean it belongs to no one, or does it mean it belongs to everyone? How do we understand the concept of Rosh Hashanah? Belongs to no one, or belongs to everyone? So we're going to have that same argument when it comes to this well, and the rabbi said these are public wells, that everybody has the right to use these wells for themselves, for the animals. So what did they say? That the water in these wells belong to no one until you actually take it and make it yours? Or they're saying it belongs to everyone. Every single person in the world has a right to use this water. Which one is it? So Mar Sabar, one view is that Beira dehefkeru. One view is that Beira belongs to no one. And why is that important? Because we'll have a Gemara B'Metzi and Daf an interesting discussion, and Daf Yud. Hamagbia Metziria lechaveira. Kana chaveira le kana chaveira. Look at this. I see a lost object on the ground, and And when I pick it up, I think to myself, you know what? I really like this person here. I'm picking this up on behalf of that other person, right? I'm doing a wonderful thing. And we have a general rule that if I do a nice thing for somebody else, even though they're not aware of it, they're automatically acquire it. Zachin la'adam shalei b'fanav. I can be zeicha on your behalf, even though you weren't aware of it. That's the rule. But when it comes to Magbia Metzila Chaverai, there's an argument, the Gemara Rambam Chamer Nachman, there's an argument, maybe like Kana Chaverai. Why is that? Because we have another argument. For example, a lender owes money to a lot of people. And one of my friends is one of the borrowers, and I know that this guy owes, $100 to this person, $100 to that person, he owes a whole bunch of people. And I heard that this guy is about to go bankrupt. And I'm walking by his house. So I go to the house and I grab something worth $100 on behalf of my friend, who's one of the borrowers, one of the lenders who's entitled to the money. I'm doing a good thing. And the din is hatoifis lebal chayiv. If I grab a hold of this guy's money to one of the lenders, the makom shechav la'achedim. But on the one hand, I'm doing a good thing. I'm helping out my friend. But at the same time, I am adversely affecting all these other lenders who just lost out an opportunity to get this $100, especially this guy's about to go bankrupt. They might never get paid. So I'm hurting other people. If I'm hurting other people, even though it's a schus for one person, it's a chayv for others. Then according to the Rav Nachman, others, we say loy kana chaveri. The same thing with an object. When I find an object, the whole world is able to get a hold of this object. But the moment that I take it, they can no longer get it. And if I'm picking it up on behalf of my friend, I'm doing a good thing for my friend, it's chus. But I'm doing a chay for the rest of the world because they no longer have access to this object. So if you hold that if you hold that if I'm grabbing something for my friend, if I'm impacting others, then it does not work also for mitzvah. So therefore, Rav Sheshes says, this boyer is hefker. And because this boyer is hefker, if I pick up the water and if I have someone else in mind, I cannot be kinder for that person because I'm hurting all these other people, the rest of the world, who cannot take this water anymore. And therefore, that person is not kinder. That person is not kinder. And so therefore, whose tchum do you follow? You follow the tchum of the memali. That's what Rav Sheshes says. And Rav Nachman says, no, that a boyer is beta the shut, or masav a beta the shut. I hold that not that it belongs to no one. I hold that it belongs to everyone. Every Jew has a right to this water. So when I drew the water and I had in mind Shimon, I'm giving Shimon his water. I'm not taking from anybody else away. Shimon also has a right to this water. And therefore and since I'm doing it on behalf of Shimon, so therefore I'm taking his water. I'm not just finding a lost object that belongs to no one, therefore I'm impacting everyone else. I'm giving Shimon his right for water, so there's no problem. So that's how we explain their argument. I have a question. You say that what? That we follow. The person that we Nachman says you go after the person that received the water, Shimon at the end, and the reason is because it's considered a partnership. So let me ask a question. It says, if a guy says, Reuben says to Shimon, I don't want you to have any benefit from any of my things. Hamud also, then Shimon can no longer have any benefit from my things. If I say to Shimon, I hate you, I don't want to see you, I don't have anything to do with you, I don't have any benefit from you. And then Hanoidid also, the one who made the vow, he cannot benefit from Shimon. Reuben cannot benefit from Shimon. What happens? He says, Hareini olecha ba'ata olai. I am also to you. I don't want you, Shimon, to take anything from me, and I don't want to take anything from you. They were both prohibited to each other. But umutarin, and yet both of us are able to go to the oile bubble, and we're allowed to go to the oile bubble and the wells that are meant for the oile bubble, and we can take from the oile bubble. Why? Because it doesn't. If you had a share in it, then I couldn't take the water from the well because I made a promise, a vow that I will have nothing to do with anything that belongs to you, and neither can you take water because I said I don't want you to benefit from me. The fact that we allow you to take water, draw water from this well that's a bubble, proves that it belongs to no one. And therefore, I'm not taking your water. You're not taking my water. And that's going to be the most question of Nachman. You don't Nachman say that a oil bubble belongs to everybody. No, it belongs to no one. And then the Brisa continues. But if there's a well in the middle of the city, that belongs to the people in the city, then that belongs to everybody in the city. And if I drink from that water, I'm taking some of your water. I'm not allowed to do that. And you cannot take the water because you take some of mine. Now, then it spells out the Elohein Dvarim Shel Oile Bubble. What do we consider Oile Bubble? Things that belong to these members. Harabais. Anything to do with the Temple Mount or Halishches or Azoris, anything there in the chambers or in the Azoris, these are called Oile Bubble and they belong to no one. Therefore, everyone has a right to be there. Uboyer Shel Em Tzadedech, and a well in the middle of the road. These belong to no one. So therefore, even though we hate each other, we made a vow, we both can drink water from that well because it belongs to neither one of us. But the Elu Hein Shaloisi, what's considered things of that city, a choiv, a street, Beis HaKnesses, a shul, a Beis HaMerches, and a bathhouse. There it belongs to both of us, so we both cannot use it. So our question is very simple. The Amid Beta should be you. If you can tell me that an oil bubble is what? Is really a partnership, that's your whole word of the partnership, that's why I can take water and have your mind. And my mutter, so how in the world is it that we both can take water from this well? Aren't we drinking some of each other's water? But Tanan, we learned clearly Hashutfin Shenodru Anozem is there were two partners who made a vow not to have benefit from each other. Asudin Lechanes Lechatzer. If we have a yard that we both share, neither of us can walk in because I might be walking part of your section. And we can't walk in. Says the Gemara. We cut us just twice. So if the person wants to bathe in the bar, you're right. We cannot bathe in that bar because you're using the entire well, and part of the well belongs to the other person. You cannot do that. But you know what we're talking about over here? Lemales. We're talking about over here about this well. All I'm talking about is taking a bucket and taking out some of the water. And therefore, why are you allowed to take out the water? The truth be told, the well belongs to both of us and every Jew in the world. So the question is, how come I can drink from the water? Because we'll say yesh brera. There's so much water there besides for me and you and so many other people. So the well of water, the bucket of water that I drew, all along it was mine and you're not part of it. When it comes to swimming in the well, I'm using all the water in that well. So therefore it's forbidden. When it comes to drawing water for a drink, I'm only taking one bucket out of who knows how many bucketfuls of water there is there. So we're going to apply the rule of the yesh brera and say that whatever water ended up in my bucket is mine. There's nothing of yours there. And that's why you're allowed to. That's what he answers. Says the Gemara, says there, when Reuben draws water, he's taking his own water. And when Shimon draws water, he's taking his own, because we apply the principle of yesh brera, even though the bar belongs to everybody, we're going to say yesh brera, you end up with your own water. But so therefore, when it comes to Tchum Yantiv, when Reuben picks up water and has in mind Shimon, since Shimon owns some of the water there, and I had in mind Shimon, I have the right to take the water and have a Shimon in mind. It's giving him his water, and that's why the Tchum is bound up with Shimon. Says Gemara, so your whole answer here is that Rav Nachman follows the principle of Brera. There's retrospectivity, and we're going to say that whatever water you drew, that's the water that always belonged to you. Says the Gemara, that principle, we learned before already, the big argument, if you say Yesh Brera and Brera. Says the Gemara, you're going to tell me V'savad Rav Nachman Yesh Brera, you tell Nachman believes in Brera. But Tanan, we learned, and the rule is as follows. Remember we had before in the Gemara of Yechel about two brothers who divided an estate. If they're considered Yorshin, each one ended up whatever belonged to them, or we say they're Lekuchas, which means we don't know if you ended up with the share of the property that really belonged to you. So it's like you swapped with each other, and every 50 years, every year you have to reassess or redistribute. We also learned in Gemara Shkolim that you have to give a machzis hashekel. And if you want to go to and change over your shekel or machzis shekel, you have to be a bit generous and pay a little bit more, a kalbain. Because remember, in those days it was actually real silver, and it was very hard to cut it exactly in half, and there were some shavings, so you had to be a bit more generous, give a bit more than half. If you give a little extra, a kalbain. And the Chacham therefore said that if two people decided to save themselves a little money, so they say, you know what, let's give a shekel between the two of us. We don't want that to happen. So we say, you know what, they both have to add a kalbain. You don't gain anything, except if a father in the Yerusha gives, and from the state, they take a shekel and they pay that because really it belongs to both of them, not two strangers, decided to share and to avoid, circumvent the system. That's what it is. They both own everything. So then you don't have to give the kalbain. That's number one. Number two is we have a rule. We'll come back to that in a minute. We have a rule called Ma'aseh Behem. Every 10th animal you strike with a red paint, and then you give it away. So when it comes to Ma'aseh Behem, the rule is that if there are two partners, you're exempt from Ma'aseh Behem. So says so partners have to give that kalboin. Two partners who own a shekel have to give that extra. But if two partners own a behemoth, they don't have to give Ma'aseh. So says the Gemara. There's a difference if two brothers did not yet divide the estate and they do things together as partners. We don't treat them as partners. We treat them as both working with their father's estate. So there's one estate. But if they divided and then they decided to pool their resources and become partners, then they're no different than two strangers becoming partners. So they said like this. But now, the Mishnah, brothers who are partners, what kind of partners are they? So if the rule is that they have to pay the kalban, which means that they divided the estate and now they decided to pool their assets together and they're going to do things together, so they're like two other partners. So then you have to pay that extra kalban. When you give a shekel, you have to pay that extra. But they're exempt from the 10th animal have to give ma'aseh because they're partners. But if the kind of partners they are is we don't really view them as partners, but they never divided the estate. They're still, the estate is still there. They both work together, but never divided it. So they're not really partners. So they have to give ma'aseh behemoth. Then Then they're exempt from the kalban because it's not two people coming together. It's coming from one estate. But Ravana continues. When do we say that they're considered as if they're one working, that they're not really strangers as partners, but they're just still working the father's estate?
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Sorry? There's two ways of dividing the estate. One is, I'll say to you, you take all the goats and I'll take all the sheep. Another way is there are 10 goats, 10 sheep. You take 5 goats, I'll take 5 goats. You take 5 sheep, I'll take 5 sheep. So Rabbi Anan said there's a big difference in how they divided the estate to see whether we treat them as just two strangers who are partners or whether they're still one. And it says as follows: if they divided goats and you take the goats and I'll take all the sheep, definitely I'm entitled to half the goats. But to make it easier, we decided to make this kind of a swap. You take the goats and I take the sheep. That's like a business arrangement. So therefore, they as if they divided the entire estate. And now when they come back together and pool their assets, they're just two partners and have a din of shutfin, not of brothers, but shutfin. So if cholku gediyim keneged tloyim, but tloyim keneged gediyim, so therefore, and I'm really entitled to half of the goats, but I'm giving you all the goats and you give me all the sheep. Okay, then we're saying it's like a swap. If I say you take half the goats and I'll take half, if you take half the sheep and I take half the sheep, then that is really the Yerusha. It's not really a partner. We're still Yerusha. We're still, the father's estate. All along, I was entitled to that. You're entitled to that. It's not like buyers. We are. Those will say yesh bereira, that this was always mine and that was always yours, and therefore it's like one. But Nachman says, afilu choku gedim kenegedim. Even if you split the goats or tloim keneged tloim, how do I know that I ended up with the 5 goats that really belong to me? Maybe I ended up with your 5 goats because I don't believe in breira. I don't say that these goats were always mine. Yeah. So therefore, we see clearly that Nachman does not believe in breira. So if Nachman does not believe in breira, and we say, how can then, if I'm not believing Breda, then what do we do about the case of the oil bubble? Why is it that we both made a net that we're not going to enjoy each other, yet we both can draw water from that well? Must be the only possible explanation is that the well belongs to neither of us. The water belongs to no one. So if the water belongs to no one, we go back to our original question. So how come if I pick up, according to Nachman, if I pick up the water and I have in mind the other person, we say that you follow the other person, isn't the rule that if you're doing something good for somebody, but you're impacting negatively to the rest of the world who also have access to this, and you took it away from them, that ability, it's not Zoicha. So how come you say commission is malaloy that Shimon, you have to follow Shimon's tchum? So the Gemara says as follows. Ella Hocha, we're talking, Ella the Kuli Alma, everyone agrees, Beta Def Kedi. Rav Sheshes and Nachman, everyone agrees that the bar belongs to no one. But so we understand Rav Sheshes because it belongs to no one and he cannot impact others negatively. So therefore, when I drew the water, even though I had Shimon in mind, Shimon wasn't kaina. Who does it end up with? With Reuven, the one who drew the water. He followed his chum. But what's the logic of Nachman? So we're learning how the way Rashi means. Elahocha, we're talking about the Makbiya Metzia Lechaveda Kamifagi. We're talking about, we all agree that I picked up a Metzia because it belongs to no one. So the water in that bar belongs to no one, like an object that's Hefker. And we don't follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, who said a few days ago that Hefker has its own tchum. But Mar Sova Kona, Mar Sova Lekona. So Rashi learns as follows. Rashi learns that, okay, everyone agrees. When I drew that water, Reuben drew the water because it belongs to no one. And I had in mind Shimon, I'm impacting negatively on the rest of the world. So Shimon definitely is not koinen, right? Not koinen. But is Reuben koinen or not? And what happened was Reuben drew the water and then he physically gave it over to Shimon. Was Reuben koinen the water or not? Rav Sheshes says that Reuben was koinen the water. And if Reuben was koinen the water, therefore, as soon as Reuben was koinen the water, we follow the tchum of Reuben. And then Reuben gave it to Shimon 5 minutes later. Shimon is not bound by Reuben's tchum. Rav Nachman says that I agree with you that when Reuben picked up the water, Shimon wasn't koinen. But neither was Reuben. And therefore, when Reuben then gave the water to Shimon, Shimon now became the rightful owner. So whose tchum do we follow? Shimon's. That's what Rashi says. If Tzeitzah Choshen explains what's the logic behind this, the logic goes as follows. When I, let's say, pick up a wallet of $100 in there and I think, this person deserves it, Shimon deserves it, and I have Shimon in mind. How do we understand why does it belong to Shimon? There's 2 ways of understanding it. One way is that Shimon acquires it through me. I'm the in-between. I'm the one who physically picked it up. So it became mine, but as soon as it became mine, it straight away moved over to Shimon because I had in mind Shimon. So it happened bevasacha, straight away. So it went through me to Shimon. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is I had in mind Shimon. That means it does not go through me. When I picked it up, it went straight to Shimon, not via me, but passed me by. And that's the machlekes here between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says, when you picked it up and you had Shimon in mind, how would it have become Shimon's? First it became mine, then it became Shimon. So what happened? I picked it up, it became mine. But there's something blocking that doesn't allow it to go from me to Shimon because I'm impacting negatively on everybody else. So where does it remain? It remains with Reuven. So now it becomes Reuven's water, and therefore that he establishes a tchum. And then after he gives the Shimon, too bad Shimon, you have to follow Reuven's tchum. But according to Rav Nachman, when I picked up the water and I had Shimon in mind, it never became Reuven's, never became Kedu. How would it meant to become Shimon's? Directly. Navas, the law is that Shimon wasn't koinen. So I can still change my mind until I give it to Shimon. But once I gave it to Shimon, who is the owner of this water now? Shimon. I never became the owner of this water because it never went through me. I never had a mind to be mine. It never went through me. When I picked up the water, I intended to give it to Shimon. So, okay, Shimon wasn't koine yet because it's impacting negatively on others. But when I gave it to him physically in his hand and he lifted it, that it became Shimon's. And now, who establishes the tchum? Shimon does. So that's the crux of the argument. I hope you all follow. It's a bit complicated. But that's how Rashi learns the Gemara. There's other ways learning the Gemara, but that's how Rashi learns the Gemara, and that's how the Tzais and others explain Shittas Rashi. Okay, good way of starting the week.
So just to clarify on that, Rav,
yeah.
So the mechanism by which the person A picks up having in mind person B, and it automatically becomes person B's. That's understandable because there's a principle of shluchai shalom kamoisa.
Right.
But what's the principle that doesn't allow me, that doesn't include me, and I've picked it up as though I'm person B?
If I give you a shlichus to do something, to give tzedakah, then who gave the tzedakah?
Then you did.
The sender, not the shlich.
That's right.
Even though the shlich physically did it, shlich gets nothing for it. It's the sender.
Right. Good.
So if you learn that tzchiyah is mitam shlichus, as you know, there's a big argument. What's the logic behind schus. Okay, now we're going to go a step further. What's the logic behind the idea that if I have you in mind and you're totally not aware of it, but I had in mind that this $100 will become yours, it becomes yours. And if I change my mind 5 minutes later, it's fafam. I can't change my mind. What's the logic behind that? You never appointed me. You had no idea. So one Rashi holds in Beitza Daf Aleph that's chiyah mitam shlichus. Anan Sadi, we are sure that this person, had he known that there's $100 lying there and you're happy to give it to him, he would have appointed you as a shliach. That's one way of learning. The other way of learning is like Tosfos learns in Kedushin of Beis, and that is there's a pasuk that teaches us Zachin la'adam shalei b'fanav. Nothing to do with shlichus. It's just a law that says Zachin la'adam, that you can acquire things on behalf of somebody else. If you learn that it's Zachin la'adam shalei b'fanav, it doesn't do with shlichus, so how does it work? How does it work? Obviously, the way it works is because there's no shlich, you never appointed me, and there's no do shlichus. So, obviously, the way it works is I can buy me something I want. So I'm zeicher for myself, and then I can give it over to you. And the Torah told us, we learned from this pasuk, that I can give things over to you without you even knowing about it. But if you learn that zechus is because of shlichus, then I'm not acquiring anything for myself. You make me a shliach. So when I picked it up, I acquired it for you. I'm not involved. I'm just the physical. I'm like your hand, an extension of your hand. That's all I am. So that's the two sides of it. How does the mechanism work? Does it go through me?
So we're using both principles of Zachin Shalom Shalom B'Fanov and Shlichus and merging them together to say that when I'm Mezaki you Shalom B'Fanov and even Shalom B'Datoi, Shalom B'Datcha, what you've done is Ki'ilu, you've made me a Shliach.
That's right. And that in itself is the argument. If is it schiyah mitam shlichus, so then it does not go through me, bypassing me. Yeah. If you learn that schus is a law in the Torah, then I pick it up myself and moves on.
Okay,
so that's how we understand this whole thing.
Sure.
This, and you can see that this little Gemara here is in the yeshivish world. It's a very lumdish Gemara. They learn it a lot, and it's mainly in Bab Metzia. Not so much people don't learn Bay in yeshivas. So it's mainly in Bab Metzia, and it's a very, very interesting concept here.
Shkoyach, beautiful. Thank you very much for explaining that.